Let's read 1 Kings chapter 3 and verses 7 through 9. 1 Kings chapter 3, and we'll just read it here. It says, "And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. And I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad. For who is able to judge this, thy so great a people?" And last week we took some time to look at King Saul's life. And we saw that God looks on the heart. He wants a heart that desires his will. But we also saw that Saul really had opportunity for spiritual success. God didn't set him up as king with deceitful purpose. Right? There was true purpose there. God wasn't actually intending Saul's downfall. But Saul, he feared men instead of God, and because of his disobedience, since he had broken God's commands, God did not give him success. And he says that the success that he would have given to him was taken away. And he pronounced judgment for his foolish choice. When we started this series of kind of intentionally looking at these Bible stories and what they say about God, what it says about Christ's work, how it points forward to Christ, we started off with David and Goliath. That was where we went after looking at the New Testament scriptures that teach us, hey, this is how you should read the Old Testament. You should read it looking for what it says about Christ. And so this week here, we're kind of jumping forward. We did look at David a little bit in comparison with Saul, but now we're coming to Solomon. And I want to just look at two things in his life. First is kind of just an interesting fact, I think, that is instructive to us and that we probably just walk past and miss, usually. But then I want to look at the promise and granting of the grace of understanding and wisdom that we just read Solomon asking for, speaking to God about. And this is, I think, usually when we think about Solomon, we think of him building the temple, and we think about the fact that he was wise. He was given wisdom by God. And so we'll look at that. But the first thing that I want to look at is Solomon and Adonijah. How many of you guys know who Adonijah is? A little bit. Rings a bell at least, right? Maybe let's start with Solomon. Who is Solomon? Well, Solomon, of course, is the son of David and Bathsheba. Okay, so Solomon was the son that David loved. David loved Bathsheba. And so, of course, we've seen here that he ends up in the kingship. We're going to look at that story a little bit, how that comes to pass. But he wasn't his first son. He wasn't his second son. Not his third, not his fourth, and we could go on. Solomon was really kind of a son of David's older age, in a way. And we might think of, okay, Solomon was always going to be the next king. Right? There was David, and then there's Solomon. But by a human standard, was Solomon actually the rightful heir of the throne? And the answer is no. 1 Kings chapter 2, everybody's shaking your head, so you guys know this. You guys are on it. 1 Kings chapter 2. I'm going to read several verses here. 1 Kings 2, verses 12 down through 17. "Then sat Solomon upon the throne of David his father, and his kingdom was established greatly. And Adonijah, the son of Haggith, came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon. And she said, Comest thou peaceably? This is Bathsheba speaking, and he said, Peaceably, Adonijah. He said, Moreover, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And she said, Say on. He said, Thou knowest that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel set their faces on me that I should reign. Howbeit the kingdom is turned about and has become my brother's, for it was his from the Lord. So there's this awareness. He's at least giving verbal affirmation to the fact that, okay, this was God's plan. Verse 16, and now I ask one petition of thee, deny me not. And she said to him, say on. And he said, speak, I pray thee, unto Solomon the king, for he will not say thee nay. He's not going to tell you no, that he give me Abishag the Shunammite to wife. So here's this conversation that sort of sets up this point that we're looking at of Adonijah coming to Bathsheba and saying, hey, would you talk to your son for me? He won't tell you no. So would you talk to him so that I can have this thing that I'm asking for? And the thing that he's asking for is a wife, a particular wife. But did you notice that she said, comest thou peaceably in verse 13? And his answer is peaceably. Well, why is that? That's weird. If they're like part of the same big family of David, why would it be like, hey, are you coming in peace? Before she even talks to him. Well, in 1 Kings chapter 1, if we were to look at the beginning of 1 Kings, David, he is old and he is not in good health. So David, at this point, he has come to a point of physically poor health, and he is largely bedridden. It talks about the fact that they've covered him with blankets, and yet he's not warming up. Okay, he's just cold, he stays in bed, he can't get healthy, he can't get strong, he feels like he can't get out of his bedroom to go do things. People have to come and see him. And in this time, in 1 Kings chapter 1 and verse 5, Adonijah lifts himself up as the new king. 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 5 says, then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared himself and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. And we could go on and read the whole story, but why Adonijah? Why Adonijah? You know, again, we can tend to think of, oh, here's just one of the brothers, one of the half-brothers, who's just this usurper. He's this evil usurper. He wants the throne. And based on 1 Kings chapter 2, we're going to see what we just read, the request. I think there is some truth to that. But notice who is helping counsel Adonijah in his role as this kind of temporary or steward king, we could say, while David is sickly. Verse 7 of 1 Kings chapter 1. 1 Kings chapter 1, it's speaking of Adonijah still, and it says, and he conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar, the priest. And they, following Adonijah, helped him. So who are his counselors? His counselors are Joab and Abiathar. So who are these men? Right? You probably know their names. At least you recognize Joab's, you hear about Joab all the time. But Abiathar as well. Well, Joab, he was the general of David's army for his entire reign. He was the leader of the army. And he led his forces even before David was installed as king. When they were still in the wilderness, when they were in the caves, when they were in the mountains, Joab had established himself as a trusted man. As one of the men, he says, I can give this man a job and he will get it done. And there was someone else who tried to take the kingship from David earlier. Absalom. And you know who killed Absalom? Joab. Absalom, in fact, was Adonijah's older brother. And Joab defended David and defended the kingdom from Absalom when Absalom tried to take the throne from David. But what about Abiathar the priest? Well, Abiathar was the chief priest during the reign of David. You see his name sometimes alongside another priest by the name of Zadok. But it says that when Abiathar eventually is no longer priest, that Zadok is put in his room. He's promoted to his position. So Abiathar was the chief priest during the reign of David. He ministered with David for years. They worked together. He counseled him. He was instrumental in bearing the ark back to Jerusalem. When David says, look, we've got to get the ark back to Jerusalem. And when Absalom revolted against David, remember there was another revolt, a brother of Adonijah? Abiathar was on David's side. So these are not men whose sole purpose was to destroy David. They weren't men who the first time there was a chance, the first time, because Absalom, he won. I mean, if you look at the story of Absalom's revolt, he practically succeeded. And it was almost through conspiracy and subterfuge that an opportunity comes for David to retake back the kingdom. And so they didn't just jump on board with the first guy who maybe is going to take the kingdom from David. And yet these are the men who are in council and helping Adonijah as he tries to set up his kingship. But look also in 1 Kings 2, verse 22, how Solomon speaks of Adonijah. 1 Kings 2, verse 22. And King Solomon answered and said to his mother. So she comes and she brings this message to Solomon and said to his mother, "And why dost thou ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask him for the kingdom also, for he is mine elder brother, even for him and for Abiathar the priest and for Joab the son of Zeruiah." So what does he say? He says, "Man, you're asking everything. Should I just give him the kingdom? He's my older brother." So Solomon even is acknowledging that Adonijah has more stake in the kingdom than he does, in a sense. And he even points to Joab. He's like, well, why don't we just give everything to Joab? Why don't we just give everything to Abiathar? Because these are the ones who are counseling with Adonijah. So Adonijah is Solomon's older brother. By human right, Adonijah has a better claim than Solomon. And what about Abishag? We've mentioned her name a couple of times. Well, Abishag was a woman who was brought to David as a wife in his old age in 1 Kings chapter 1. And David never treats her as his wife, we'll say. But she cares for him. She loves him. She takes care of him. Describes her as a beautiful woman. And so here is this virgin wife of King David that Adonijah is saying, can I take her as my wife? Now, Adonijah, if we look and we try to walk through and put the pieces together, Adonijah was the fourth in line to the throne. He was number 4 by birth. So who was ahead of him? Who came before him? Well, number 1 was Ammon. Ammon was the brother, the son of David, who Absalom killed because he had forced himself on Tamar. You guys remember that story? Now, Absalom, he said that this was the reason that he was doing this was because he was angry at him over Tamar, but this also served Absalom in his eventual purpose to try to take the kingdom from David. David had a second son from Abigail, who's mentioned in 1 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 2, and he's never mentioned again. His name is never mentioned again at all. Even when Absalom is consolidating his claim to the throne, so it seems likely that he probably had died at a young age, and so he doesn't factor into when Absalom is trying to take over, when Adonijah is considering his position. Third was Absalom. Okay, so when Absalom kills Ammon, and the next son has already died at a young age, as a boy or perhaps as a baby, well, Absalom now is the rightful heir. So third was Absalom himself, who was already killed by Joab after he had staged a temporarily successful coup against David. So Adonijah at this point is the rightful heir as number 4. And think about the situation. David is old and on his deathbed, really. I mean, for all intents and purposes, he's no longer ruling. When this happens, they have to come and tell him what happened. He has no idea that anything has even happened. And both Joab and Abiathar, some of David's strongest supporters, seem to be accepting that Adonijah's claim is legitimate and that the time has come for the transition. And Solomon here, where we read in chapter 2, even recognizes that Adonijah has a stronger claim by human traditional practices than he does. And Adonijah is trying to strengthen it even more by taking David's wife for himself. Right? If he can say, hey, here's the queen, the last queen that you remember, and me, I'm the rightful heir, he would be really establishing his claim. He would be securing his stake in the kingship. So Solomon, in fact, humanly speaking, was not the rightful heir. In 1 Kings chapter 1, look at what Bathsheba appeals to when she says, hey, my son should be the king. Verse 13. Verse 13 and verse 17. 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 13 says, go and get thee in unto King David, and say unto him, didst not thou, my lord, O king, swear unto thine handmaid, saying, assuredly, Solomon thy son shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne. Why then doth Adonijah reign? And verse 17, and she said unto him, my lord, thou swearest by the Lord thy God unto thine handmaid, saying, assuredly, Solomon thy son, Bathsheba's son, shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne. This is what is appealed to as a promise from David to Bathsheba. But the interesting thing is, it's not recorded in Scripture. The promise. That promise is not recorded in Scripture. I mean, for all we know, Bathsheba and Nathan, the prophet, he's here in this as well, though we're not looking at him, they could have fabricated the story and tricked poor old David into believing something that had never happened, for all we know. Now, I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that's what happened. I think the evidence seems to suggest that, yes, David had made this promise to Bathsheba, but it's not recorded. So why did God allow it to happen this way? And why was the promise not recorded in the inspired record of the books of Samuel? Why did God not preserve that in his word for us? And I believe that this is a repetition of what we saw with Jacob and Esau. Remember that when we looked at Jacob and Esau? Well, why the younger? He's the one who has the right. I think God is just demonstrating that he doesn't have to follow our expectations when he chooses his plan for salvation. 1 Kings 3, verse 7. So who did the choosing? This is Solomon here. And he says, and now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father. Right? Solomon says, look, you made me king, God. So this was God's plan. And it flew in the face of human tradition. It flew in the face of human expectation. It rejected what men expect and what men believe is wise and correct and the right order. And God doesn't have to bow to what we expect. Solomon was part of the kingly line that gave Jesus rightful claim to the Israelite throne. And just like God chose to use Jacob over Esau for his purpose, and Solomon over Adonijah for his purpose, he can also purpose to give righteousness to those who are humble and contrite of heart, rather than the ones who do the most to achieve righteousness. And I use those terms, humble and contrite of heart. Psalm 34 and verse 18 says, the Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth who? Such as be of a contrite spirit. God doesn't look for the people who are doing their best and say, well, they did the best. Maybe they didn't quite cross the finish line, but they got the farthest. No, he says, I am looking for those whose heart is right. I am looking for those who have a contrite spirit, who will come to me humbly and contritely and acknowledge, God, I can never do it. I need your help. And those are the ones that he saves. Even Bathsheba, she entered into the house of David. How and why? Because of sin. Sin is what brought her into the house, into the line of David. And yet God is willing to redeem that sin for good as well and demonstrate, hey, I defeat sin. I'm greater than sin. Showing that his salvation is greater by including her in his plan for the human birth of Jesus. And just as God goes against human convention to save those who reach out to him with just the empty hand of faith, and judgment is reserved for those who trust in their own efforts and plans for salvation, well, in the same way, Joab and Abiathar fall under judgment for their choices to move forward with a man-made plan rather than looking to God and accepting that his way was the only way. It's the right way. Now, I want to look very quickly here at Solomon's request to discern good and evil. I say very quickly. You guys know me. We'll see. Okay, 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 5. What does God say to Solomon here? Now, we read here from verses 7 down to 9. But what does God say to Solomon? In Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, "Ask what I shall give thee." Now, this is something in our prayer series we talked about a lot. I think it's very important to remind ourselves regularly that God is not a wish-granting genie. If you've seen the movie from a couple years ago, I think we saw it on TV just the other day. God is not a wish dragon. God is not a wish dragon who has to fulfill the desires of someone if they say the right words. God is literally sovereign, eternal creator. He made everything. He can do whatever he wants. That is his right. We don't get to order him or control him with our wishes. He is King of kings, Lord of lords. He hears us and gives to us, but it's out of his good pleasure. When we ask for things that are within his will, is what the Bible teaches. But for a moment, he gives Solomon the opportunity to ask. And God says that he will grant whatever it is that he asks for. He says, "You name it, and I will give it. Ask me the thing that I will give you." How many times as kids do we do that thing where one kid asks, "Well, if you had 3 wishes, if you found a magical lamp and a genie came out," right? After the movie Aladdin came out, I'm sure this was like a big resurgence in the whole "what if you had 3 wishes" thing. Okay? And of course, every genie has to establish the first rule of being a genie is you can't wish for more wishes, right? and so we play that game, and of course a good Christian kid would say something like, "Well, there's no such thing as a genie." And the other kid might say, "Well, I know, but what would you ask for?" If it was true, right? And we think of, well, what about good health? Man, I wish I was Michael Jordan. Or, I want to be LeBron James. Or I want to be whoever. Somebody who just won something in the Olympics, right? And money. Well, what if I had all this money? Oh, success. I want to be famous. I want to be successful. I want to succeed in everything I do. And of course, as kids, we probably spiritualized it. If you were growing up in church, you probably spiritualized it a little bit. Well, if I got $1 billion, think of all the good things I could do for the church, and I could give to poor people, and I could help feed people, as well as buy all the game systems, and as adults, the guns and the cars and the houses that I would buy, right? Right? We try to spiritualize it. But those are the types of things we would ask for: health, money, success. But Solomon says, we read in verse 7, "Look, I don't have experience. O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I'm but a little child. I have no life experience. I don't know. And I know not how to go or come in." And so what does he ask for? He says, how can I rule over so many people? He asks for the discernment of good and bad. And verses 10 through 12 tell us that God is pleased with this request. The speech pleased the Lord, verse 10, that Solomon had asked this thing. And God said to him, "Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked for thyself long life, health, neither hast thou asked riches for thyself, money, nor asked the life of thine enemies, success," whatever you do, "but hast asked for thyself understanding to discern judgment, behold, I have done according to thy words. Lo, I have given thee a wise and understanding heart, so that there was none like thee before thee, neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee." Hey, since you didn't ask for health and for riches and for unstoppable success over your enemies, I have given you wisdom and understanding. But God goes on, and he tells him, on top of that, I'm going to give you the things that you could have asked for: riches and honor. I will give you success. Verse 13, and I have also given thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, so that there shall not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. But notice that so he gives him riches and he gives him honor. He says, right now, today, you have riches and you have honor. But there's also an ongoing thing of those promises. And the ongoing promise is health. I will give you long life, except he makes it conditional. In verse 14, and if thou wilt walk in my ways to keep my statutes and my commandments, as thy father David did walk, then I will lengthen thy days. Then I'll give you health. I'll give you long life as well. And so again, the portions that are temporal, that are locked in time, those are granted. More than you have riches and honor, more than everyone else has or will. But for the future, God doesn't guarantee his health forever because that's dependent on Solomon's obedience. To this point, the promises that have been unconditional have been to Abraham and his seed and to David that he would have a seed that reigns forever. And both of those, the New Testament tells us, are Christ. Christ is the one who perfectly and unconditionally pleases God. And that's why salvation for us can be unconditional, because the promise of salvation was given to Christ unconditionally, as we've been looking at in Galatians chapter 3. But why does God love Solomon's request so much? You know, this is a pattern in Solomon's life. There's a pattern to this. And it's a great lesson that I think it is the great lesson that we should be learning from the life of Solomon. And that is, rather than focusing on himself and his desires, what was good for him, he puts service that God has put him in ahead of his own wants. Right? Wouldn't he be better served with perfect health? Wouldn't he be better served with riches? Wouldn't he be better served with success over all his enemies? But he says, I don't know if I can do the job that you had given me well enough with who I am and what I have and my experience. And so I'm asking you that I can serve you better. Please give me the ability to do the job that you have given me in a better way. God had put him in this place, and despite the fact that it should have been his older brother's place, rightfully, and Solomon tells God, I can't do it. I'm not enough. I want to serve you. I want to do it well. And so rather than asking for something that could serve him, Solomon asked the Lord to be able to serve him, to serve the Lord better. Solomon put God before himself. Look at Solomon's service, his serving of building the temple, God's house. We talked about this. These are the two things that we think of in the life of Solomon, his wisdom and he built the temple. So what about when he built the temple? 1 Kings chapter 6, verses 37 and 38. It says, in the 4th year was the foundation of the house of the Lord laid in the month Ziph. Okay, so the foundation was laid, the building was started for the temple. Verse 38, and in the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished throughout all the parts thereof, and according to all the fashion of it. So was he, Solomon, 7 years in building it. It took him 7 years to build the temple. That's a big project. But look at what got delayed. 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 1. But Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all his house. He prioritized building God's house before building his own house. His priority was God's work and service to God, not service to his own wants. And you might think, well, what about when he went off the rails? Solomon, he didn't continue to live this way, Pastor Rhodes. So how can you claim that this is the main lesson that we should learn from this story of his wisdom and his whole life in general? How can we claim that if he doesn't even follow that pattern? Well, then I would say, what does Solomon say about it? After leaving his first love of pleasing God and serving God and turning to the false god of pleasing himself with his life. I think that's what we have in the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes, this is just a weird thought. Maybe it just works for me because I'm a weirdo. But if you're depressed, I would read Ecclesiastes. Now, Ecclesiastes is like the writings of a depressed person. But I think what it does is it shows, hey, even King Solomon struggled with depression, and nothing made sense to him. And what value is there? What does he say? Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. The words of the preacher, he calls himself, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities. Emptiness of all empty things, saith the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Everything is empty. Everything is nothing. Everything is useless. Verse 3, what profit hath a man of all his labor which he hath taken, which he hath, taken under the sun. Oh, it's taketh. I was like, I must have typoed that. Which he hath taken under the sun. Whatever you do, it's all useless. What benefit is there? Verse 14, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun. I've looked at it all. And behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. None of it's good. And what he's saying, what Solomon is saying, after having run away from serving God, he stopped prioritizing God's work, and he starts prioritizing himself, if you read the rest of the book of Ecclesiastes. What he's saying is, look, I went and I did it all. I prioritized me, and it was all useless. It was all worthless. Everything that you accomplish here under the sun is the language that he uses. Here on earth, here with earthly purpose. It's useless and it's empty. And what does he say at the end of the book of Ecclesiastes? Again, kind of buttoning this up. At the end of this declaration, this whole book, it's just saying everything's useless and worthless. Again, it reads like someone who's depressed. And if you go and read it, you can realize, man, my focus is wrong, because this is how he ends it. Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Solomon, he gets to the end, and he looks back, and he says, I did go off the rails. I started off so well. I started off prioritizing God. God gave me blessing. God gave me honor. He gave me riches. And I just said, well, what else is out there? And I pursued it all. I went after it. And it's all so depressing and worthless. And he comes around, and he says, look, pleasing God, that's what I ought to be doing. That's what I should have been doing. I should have been looking to God. C.T. Studd, I've mentioned him in the past, but he had left a career of athletic success and fame. And he went out as a missionary from England. And I think he kind of summarized this point well in these famous words, and we sang them earlier. Only when life 'twill soon be past, only what's done for Christ will last. What has value is when we do things for God. Is when we say, okay, God, I'm going to prioritize you instead of me. And when we get that reversed, like Solomon did when he said, well, let me go try to experience this. I want to please myself in this way. I'm going to please myself in this way. When he did that, he said, now this is all worthless. I haven't accomplished anything. It's all empty. God does not promise earthly success. There's no declaration that he is going to let us choose what it is that he will give to us. But we can learn from Solomon, and we can learn that success comes from God. And we must prioritize his service over self-service. if we desire to have success with him and from him. God's will is the best will. Let's serve him with our time, our abilities, our money, our everything. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man.